Hello, ARC family, and welcome to the ARC journey. I want to continue on with the conversation we were having last time, and that is leadership development as a part of as a part of discipleship, and understanding. Robert Clinton, in his book, The Making of a Leader, talks about six phases that God takes us through in developing a leader, a spiritual leader. So, with that understanding, we can help someone who's in the discipleship process identify where they're at and what God's doing with them and process it. So, we want to talk about a couple of those today, and we'll talk a couple next week. Just for a side note, I'm going to add the links for registration and for the packet at the bottom of this vlog so that you have the information for conference, right? So you can get registered and you can pick up your packet, and that way it's out there on multiple places where you can link and connect up, and hopefully you can do that and have everything you need for conference. Okay. Robert Clinton, The Making of a Leader, six phases. The first phase is sovereign foundations. And looking at this, comparing this with the life of Moses is what we're going to do, my attempt is. So sovereign foundations talks about those things that we absolutely have no control over in our birth, right? What family we're born into, childhood illnesses, birth order. It's all that kind of stuff all wrapped up. All of those things that we go through in our childhood and our most formative years, and uh, how we deal with that and how we process it, and it will affect very much the kind of leader that we will be. And oftentimes it's through the discipleship process and in our maturing and growing and following Jesus, that he is actually helping to heal some of those things, where he's helping us to understand that he loves us for just who we are, and that he has created us, is that it was his sovereign. It is those things that we look at and those influences of our life have been part of a sovereign plan, right? So we look at Moses, right? Moses was born in a time in Egypt when the Pharaoh had decreed to the midwives to kill any of the boys that were being born. Moses managed to escape that dastardly plan with his mom and his sisters. And when he got old enough, right, they put him into a basket, took him down where they knew that the Pharaoh's daughter would be bathing, and she gets the basket, adopts the child, and then takes him back to mom to help feed him and raise him to a point where he can live with the Pharaoh's daughter, right? So through all of this, God positions Moses to grow up in the Pharaoh's household, right? He grows up to receive the greatest education that was possible in his day. He positions him to understand what it means to be in a position of power. And at the same time, he's got all these things also working against him. He is a Hebrew in the house of the Pharaoh. He is never going to measure up. He is always going to be the outsider. He ends up being an outsider not only in Pharaoh's court, but with his own family. So we see all of these things that are all could swing either way, right? It is no wonder that we see later on life the anger issues that Moses has and has to wrestle through. A lot of them come from this. Like, could you imagine being picked on like he was by the other kids in the court? Could you imagine him being ridiculed? Could you imagine him not being accepted by his own people or by the Egyptians? Right? It's all of those things that are all part of where God puts us, right? And the reality is that none of us are in this on our own, right? We all stand on the shoulders of giants, and there is no perfect giant. We all have our faults and our failures, and we pass those on, or we inflict those on our kids. And um, that's just the reality. And the truth is that how we respond to these factors determines much of our leadership potential. And so how we working through them and understanding them and relating back to them uh, um, is going to be critical. So he talks about phase one, the sovereign foundations, and the second phase is inner life growth, and that's the period in which one's character and spiritual life is developed. It is often the time when we experience conversion. So that is happening, and it can be a long process, or it can be a short process. Um, uh, so the big point about this that Robert Clinton points out is that it is the inner life growth, right? Phase two is learning to hear God's voice, being in tune with the Holy Spirit, and it is our growing in our Christ likeness. So that is happening in a Christian home, right? In a home where the foundations are being laid. That is happening in in progression, right? And it's being built on. In someone who has come to Christ outside of that experience, this is all brand new. And so you are the one that is showing them, they are observing, they're watching to understand, they're seeking, asking questions of. So that inner life growth is what it oftentimes tips the scale for our transformational growth, right? Is being able to hear God, being able to seek God's face, understanding that we are becoming like Christ, right? Transformational life. And then the empowerment of the Holy Spirit to be able to hear, to listen, and to overcome, right? So that's the inner life growth. Phase three that he talks. Yeah, and hold on to that thought. I'm going to come back to Moses here in the end. The phase three is our ministry maturing, right? So in ministry maturing, we realize and we begin to explore strengths and weaknesses. What are we good at? What aren't we good at? And it is this continuous growing as we are following Jesus on his mission, right? So we are leading someone to Christ. How did that go? What did I learn? What's my experience in walking with someone? What are the things that relationally that I'm good at in helping to develop or to teach, right? If I'm teaching, am I good at the lesson development? Am I a good teacher? Am I better at rounding up the kids? Am I better at leading the games rather than the lesson? What is it that you're good at? And this is the time when that is explored and we grow with this, and it begins to develop within us. And so this is less about what we do and more about who we are. That's what happens in ministry maturing, is we discover through lots of failure, through limited success, who we are and how God has made us, right? So we take this back and we talked about sovereign foundations. We looked at we want to look at inner life growth, and hearing God's voice. Moses has this. We see this pivotal moment when Moses recognizes that the Egyptians are abusing the Hebrews, right? And so he is caught in this dilemma. He hears the voice, but at the same time, he hears the voice that this is not right. Something is wrong. He has the power, being in Pharaoh's court, to step in and do something. But the decision that he makes is terribly, terribly wrong, right? And he knows it because he looks around to see if anybody is watching, right? Before he kills the Egyptian guard. And he kills him, he buries him in the sand. And he knows, because of that, he knows, right? That's the spirit talking. This inner life growth, the spirit is moving, is talking, right? So God is speaking, God is developing that conscious in Moses. And he doesn't know how to handle it. He doesn't know how to do it. That's also then part of the ministry maturing, right? Because the next day he steps in between two Hebrews that are fighting, and now they respond to him by saying, "What, you gonna kill us like you did the Egyptian guard?" Right? And it's like, okay, right? The gig is up, and he decides he needs to move on. We need to flee before we're killed here. So there is this development that God is doing inside of Moses, right? He sovereignly positioned him to be in a place that was probably at sometimes hurtful for Moses. It was hurtful for him to be in the court, even though he was receiving the education, even though it was the positioning that God was trying to lay on him. I'm going to make you a man who is able to speak in the court, who understands the court etiquette, who is privy to the language, the education, the protocols, all of that stuff. And yet there was this anger, this overriding anger. How do I overcome this? Where does this lead me to? And at the same time, Moses is a Levite, right? He is part of the priestly tribe, and God's sovereign positioning him, and then the development of his inner life growth is ongoing. It's a continuing thing, and then it steps into this ministry maturing, and he failed horribly. This pivotal point, right, is absolute horrible failure. And that is, but God wasn't done with him. God's not done with him. It's all part of the process of discipling him and preparing him to be the leader that he needs to be. So there's more inner life work that needs to happen. There's more ministry maturity that needs to happen, and there certainly are issues with the sovereign foundation that Moses needs to grapple with and wrestle with. Right? God, why did you do this to me? Can't you? And we're going to hear him say later on, right? I don't want to do this. Send someone else, right? You've already put me through enough, right? So God deals with all of that, and creates in Moses the spiritual leader that he needs him to be. All right, so next week we'll talk about phase 4, life maturing. We'll talk about convergence, and we'll talk about afterglow or celebration. But it's really critical to understand these phases and help our disciples grapple with this in their becoming the leaders that God is calling them and depending on them to become. All right, see you next week, and keep shining. Bye-bye.